Hi, my name is Kristoff. I am the CEO and founder at KYC Portal. Us at KYC Portal, we focus on automating and streamlining the back office of due diligence and KYC processes. In fact, that is why the title of this presentation is focused on Customer Lifecycle Management. And today's session is going to be purely focused on the efficiencies and the improvements that such systems, such processes can bring to your operation. In fact, we want to open with a slide that shows exactly the level of efficiencies that we've managed to achieve with use cases based on our past with our clients. The first target is what we call a 63% increased efficiencies on internal processes. The second element is 55% reduction in time to onboard customers, all throughout which, so whilst achieving 63% efficiencies in internal processes and 55% reduction in onboarding of customers, we are also reducing the risk exposure. In fact, important also to note that the increased efficiencies, the 63%, is achieving and actually proven a reduction in cost of maintaining internal processes, so the teams, the costs of assessing the risk, the ongoing side of things, but also an improvement in the speed at which the services and the processes, the tasks are actually done. These measures, just for you to be aware before we go into the detail of how we achieve these figures, are based on a total of 54 use cases that we studied, and these are all live scenarios that clients are using. The clients vary across jurisdictions. I think we had about 16 jurisdictions across 5 continents, so even addressing different regulatory bodies, different perceptions of what risk is. And the industries covered based on these use cases are fiduciary services, so fund and trust management, capital markets, including investment, depository, and asset and wealth management. So the statistics that we're going to focus on, and actually the entire process of this presentation, is we're going to take you through how can we achieve such percentage of increased efficiencies, as well as reducing the cost to onboard, as well as reducing the risk exposure all throughout. And the focus of all this is the customer journey. Yes, so customer lifecycle management focuses on the journey of a customer, which in plain terms, if one had to simplify it, there's the onboarding and there's the ongoing. Customer is onboarded through whatever means there is, and then goes through the ongoing. And the ongoing is split. There's the reviews, which happen on a regular basis based on the risk of the subject, based on the overall process of my risk with regulators, and also remediation. Remediation is when the regulator, or when we as a company, realize that we have to remediate and collate certain information throughout the ongoing relationship with subjects. Both of which, however, in the ongoing side, they still require communication with the end subject. In fact, what we see, what we studied in the past, and since we launched our product in the market, we found out that this element of outreach with the customer exists not only at onboarding stage, but all throughout the ongoing experience, the ongoing relationship with the client. We also see markets on the market that onboarding is usually done in different ways. So there are companies who have apps, online solutions, PDFs, email, and then we always refer to the customer lifecycle management, to the CLM, which handles the back office of the company. However, for us to achieve those figures, and we're going to show you how, those figures that you saw before of efficiencies and of cost savings and also reduction in risk, we changed a bit the approach. Instead of the CLM part only focusing on the back office, since the communication with the subject is ongoing, we decided to twist things a bit around and created a lifecycle management process which encompasses onboarding. In fact, the CLM is an end-to-end solution that covers the entire spectrum of a client, the life cycle of a client, from the very first day of onboarding them all throughout the ongoing, but obviously with an element of outreach. an element of outreach that is embedded within the same product. And this, we believe, is what led to the kind of efficiencies in the use cases that you're going to see, and the level of detail that we've managed to achieve by reducing the risk and also improving the efficiencies across the board. So what we did and what we're going to show you today is focusing on the key areas of such use cases of how clients are achieving these figures in relation to these three elements: the onboarding, the reviews and the remediation. For each feature we're going to show you a trump card. We created a trump card. I got this idea from seeing the kids playing with their trump cards. So over here for each feature we're going to show you how it relates to. So for example, in this case, the single customer view, it addresses and relates and ticks the boxes for helping with both, with all of the onboarding, the reviews and remediation, but also how it relates and how it is helping in achieving those figures that you saw at the very beginning: internal efficiencies, faster onboarding and less risk exposure. So let's start with the single customer view. So the single customer view is the concept of allowing you, the system allowing you to create a customer, a subject, an entity, and be able to link them, reuse them across services, across channels, irrespective of how many times that subject is actually involved in your organization. This ability saves a lot of time and also gives you the efficiencies because you do not have to re-input everything from scratch. It is the ability to start, for example, saying, listen, I already have ABC Limited under, for example, as a shareholder, corporate shareholder under one entity. Now they're asking for a new service, or they showed up under a new structure. Use from existing allows me to create the entire structure, leaving the related parties the same at a click of a button, the linked documents, the ability to even link screening. Everything is merged and moved with one subject. In fact, this module also allows you to alert your teams when you're not aware that, for example, trying to input a subject that is already across the structure of the bank of the organization. And such a module helps in a lot of ways. So obviously the centralization of data at subject level across all my channels, across all my services, which leads to obviously the same document for a subject. So if a subject is being onboarded for different services across the organization, so an entity, a subject is onboarded for retail banking, but then he shows up as a shareholder, you do not need to ask for the proof of ID and proof of address once again, because they are centralized. But even the fact that you are centralizing that, you then have one document irrespective of the number of involvements that the subject has. So one expire date, one verification of a document, one check. Even on screening, the famous checking my subject for political exposure, adverse media, sanctions, you're doing one check, not a check across departments of where that subject is. One task, so even one cost with the third party that you're conducting the searches with, but even one cost of your teams going to the false positives to vet them. You also have the concept of one review. So once you have a subject, the review policy is based on that subject, irrespective of how many times they are involved. However, another very interesting part, because in a lifecycle management platform that you also have the customer outreach embedded, you're also giving the power, the ability for the customer themselves to reuse their own structures across services. So if you have a customer who has a structure with multiple involvement of parties, of entities, who is applying for different services with your company, they can easily add and import their structure once across all their services. The next feature that we wanted to focus on is the corporate source register. And this is an element, a feature that helps the onboarding and the reviews. What is the corporate source register? So the corporate source register is a feature that allows you to search and scrape data from company house providers that are available out there. So the ability that from within the CLM that you have, you can search a company, see the details that are being reported, at a click of a button, import the fields, import the data, import the values. It also allows you to even research the hierarchy, the related parties, the UBOs, shareholders, directors, and also at a click of a button, importing that structure into your CLM. Such systems also give you the benefit of being able to compare across providers to understand which data is correct, which is the best sample of data to be able to import and vet the data that you're importing. Some of these providers also, in fact, give you the ability to import documentation M&As. However, a feature like this helps the entire process, one, to be able to validate the consistency of the data that you're uploading, the ability to import structures at a click of a button, so rather than having to key in massive complex structures within your system, the system is allowing you to do that very fast. The ability to challenge what your customers are inputting for you, but not only that, again, because we have a CLM that is embedded with the outreach side, you can actually prepare all of this data at a click of a button before you send it to the customer for them to start filling in the information. And this becomes advantageous because it gives the customer also a level of comfort that all the data is being validated and input as you go along. Moving on to the next feature. So the next feature that we wanted to talk about is the dynamic policy engine. I think this is one of the most important elements, even though it's not the top trump that is still coming. The dynamic policy engine impacts and helps all the aspects of onboarding, reviews, remediation, and mostly with contributing to the internal efficiencies. When you have a CLM similar to this, one of the most important elements is the ability to be in full control. Your compliance teams, your operations teams have to have the full ability to change, tweak, define, and set the entire scenarios. One of the biggest constants in this market is change. So the regulations are constantly changing based on money laundering directives, based on market happenings following Panama Papers and Paradise Papers. We all changed our perception of risk. Based on internal policy, even COVID impacted our perception of risk. So the system needs to adapt, and the system needs to be adapted at the click of a button. So the system needs to allow you to define your entire policy. So the ability to define what your entities are, what you call entities, what are the related parties behind a counterparty. The ability to change and define the fields, the data we collect for each type of party, and even defining the validation, the order. Reason being is, if something changes tomorrow and suddenly you need to ask for something new, you don't need to change and code anything in the system. It's going in this interface and being able to define it. A system that would allow you to then link the scores, add the weights, add scores on whatever fields you added in the system. Tell the system how it should calculate risk, how it should calculate the score, giving the categories, defining the categories of risk. The system should also even let you define, for example, the document requirements. What are the document templates we ask out of what type of entity? Not only that, but even based, for example, on conditional policy. What is conditional policy? For example, I want to tell the system, the second that I have a director ask for a bank reference, that the director becomes high risk, so instantly alerting me on that. The system also should allow you to define the life cycle. What are the statuses? How should they move from one to the other? How does the system react, and what should be escalated? And based on all these, the system should allow you to be in control at any point in time, instantly applying your policy, your changes across the system. The advantages of such a feature allow you to be able to quickly react to market changes, so reducing your risk exposure drastically because it's happening and you're doing it based on what needs to happen now. However, such a feature is also very powerful because you're in full control of defining what is presented to both your teams as well as your customers, because you can change in real time what the fields are. Having such a system being so dynamic allows you to create rule-based triggers based on real-time events. So for example, one of the biggest examples that we use and our clients use is if the risk of a client hit high or extreme for whatever reason, instantly call my core banking system to stop any transactions from happening until compliance go in and review it. So the ability to trigger real-time events, real-time actions based on the real-time risk and data that is being perceived. One of the advantages, in fact, one of the largest banks we have as a client uses it to be able to even expose to the customer, because again, the outreach side is embedded in our product, to show the customer the progress of an application as it's being handled by the bank. So not only at onboarding stage, but all throughout the entire life cycle of a client. However, most importantly, when you have a dynamic policy engine, what it allows you to do is to create very granular policies based on channel, product, service that the bank is offering. So one of the things we noticed most is that banks, even when they have a product based on the jurisdiction where they're selling the product, or else even based on the type of product, they tend to change or have different perceptions of risk. For example, one bank is more risk averse as to the wealth management services than the fund management services. So having a system allowing you to create granular policies directed to that particular product, channel or service will give you the benefit of achieving such efficiencies across the board, across even the entire organization. The next feature that we're going to focus on is the embedded screening, and this is the screening is what we're referring to the third parties that offer the data for PEPs, sanctions, adverse media, etc. And this is something that when you embed such third-party data providers into a CLM like this, it hits and ticks the boxes for all of them again. So the onboarding, the reviews, and also the remediation. So what is embedded screening? So in such systems, you would need the ability, ideally, to be able to, on a subject, search a subject, search based on the parameters that you are defined, integrate with whatever screening provider of your choice is, LexisNexis, Thomson Reuters, Refinitiv, giving you the false positives, the false positives to be able to go in, review, see the data, check if it's your subject or not, and then decide if it's a match or no match. Obviously, such systems would obviously allow you to be able to even see the details of what is coming from the third party, offering even also ongoing monitoring, where I want my subjects to be constantly monitored on an ongoing basis, for example, or on a weekly basis. So all the patterns of integrating a third party at this stage. However, the advantage of embedding such third parties into a CLM is crucial because it leads to efficiencies. The first one and biggest example that we have is the ability to define such screening based on triggers which are exposing you to risk. So for example, we have a client who has 5.7 million subjects in the product. Obviously, you can imagine the manual effort that they need if they had to put all the subjects to be monitored daily. With the regulators, they liaised, and the regulators gave them the leeway and told them, listen, okay, why don't you do your high risk and extreme risk subjects daily, but all your medium and lows do them once every 3 months. So a system like this would have and would allow you to be able to set these parameters based on risk, based on field values, based on different parameters that you want to set. The advantage over here is obviously that you're reducing your costs with third parties, but you're also reducing the effort of your internal teams of how many false positives they have to work on. But at the same time, you're not increasing your risk exposure. You're not actually, you're decreasing it because you're focusing only on the ones that have the biggest risk. A nice thing as well about embedding such third parties into a CLM is the action of what happens next once your team take a decision. So if I have a false positive, your team goes in, say, no, this is not my client, yes, this is my client. Systems like these allow you to be able to link what should happen next in the workflow based on this being a match, based on this being a match, based on it being a PEP or a sanction or disqualified director. So it allows you to decide what level of risk you want to increase, if the application should be escalated. So again, adding to the automation of the entire process. And the best example to mention over here is a retail bank in the UK where they told us, listen, we want to define the happy part. A happy part is someone registers from the onboarding app, comes to KYCP, and based on a number of rules, we want the system to actually call our core banking system and open the account within less than a minute. And the happy part had a number of rules that we had to trigger. Like, for example, if the risk of the customer is low, if the documents provided are verified. However, there was this step that the bank always used to do manually, searching for political exposure, sanctions, adverse media, to check if there are false positives, to be able to then go through them, because that cannot be automated, and then open the account. Systems like these, when you integrate them, allow you to say, all right, listen, run a search for me. If there is no aspect of a match or potential match, a false positive with my subject, then yes, continue with the happy part and open the account. So again, when you embed all these data elements into a CLM of such sort, the system will allow you to create automation as you go along. Next in line from a feature perspective is real-time automated risk, and this is our trump card. In fact, this is all stars. This is one of the elements that contributes to onboarding, reviews, remediation, and leads to the biggest efficiencies across the board. What is real-time automated risk? So as we said, we're combining all the elements. So before we said you need a system that is fully dynamic, where the system allows you to create your fields, your risk, your weights, your bands, what are your categories of risk. A system that is then using all the data to be able to, based on your configuration, calculate risk. Calculate risk at entity level, at application level. The system is calculating risk for each category, for each field, for each input. Whatever data is being modified or changed is leading to risk calculations being done in real time. In fact, ideally also such systems keep risk over time. How was the risk when we onboarded this customer? How did it change? For what reason? And what led to the application being as such? In fact, these are the famous CRAs, where I can easily, at a click of a button, load the CRA of a particular time frame. Such systems also are important because then you can monitor how risk evolved over time and what changes have led to risk movements based even on the status of the application. In fact, one important feature that clients love about risk automation and risk assessment based on real-time values is the snapshot comparison, the ability to pick two snapshots of risk and compare between them what changed, what were the elements that were added, modified or removed that have led to changes in risk. But we're here to see why such a module would help in efficiencies. So the first thing is that you're being alerted that the minute risk happens. So such systems reduce the risk exposure to the second, to the minute that risk is happening. So there are many parameters in the system that let you define what should happen when risk changes. For example, if the director's risk came too high, instantly flag that I need to ask for a bank reference. If the application went too high, call my internal system to do X, Y, and Z. The system has all these real-time parameters, which usually are picked up on a review basis. When the review happens, you're actually going through the past months to see when that risk was triggered. This is changing the concept of reviews. It's changing the concept of reviews because it is instantly alerting your teams on the day that you're exposed to risk. The system then can use this risk even to change, both internally and externally, what data needs to be captured based on that real-time risk. So the system allows you to change the requirements that you need to ask for. In fact, this is one great feature that helps in streamlining the onboarding process. The onboarding process, the outreach modules, can be adapted to change based on the risk of the subject in real time. So now we're going to see later in the slide, when the client is inputting the details that you are requesting for them, the system is in real time calculating the risk and changing the fields and changing the documents being asked for based on the real-time risk value. And this is a very, very big benefit for efficiencies, because you're avoiding the toing and froing with customers. You don't first send a set of questions, the client fills them in, sends them back, then based on the risk calculation we send them back to the client because now I need this, this and this. So it's avoiding toing and froing of data with customers in the onboarding experience, making the process more streamlined. Apart from reducing toing and froing, the system is also making it simpler for those clients who have low risk, but only more turbulent as an onboarding process for those who have a high risk element. Obviously, the most important element of all this is the trigger rule-based actions. Practically, in the rules engine, the system allows you to create alerts, not only internal within KYC Portal, but also even with third parties, whereby you can actually tell other systems what they need to do based on the real-time risk alerts. Next in line is the embedded outreach. The embedded outreach is what we've been mentioning from the very beginning, where the CLM process should, within it, contain the outreach itself. And the outreach tool, in fact, addresses all the aspects: onboarding, reviews and remediation. As we said initially, the element of outreach is constantly present within the entire KYC and due diligence process. And having outreach embedded in a CLM process is one of the biggest advantages that one can get. Reason being, outreach exists in many different ways. What you're seeing on screen, for example, is the outreach module for corporate relationships, where you're giving corporates the ability to manage their application, add related parties, add all the requirements. All this is all guided based on rules that you define. You define the fields that are visible, the validation. And this is what I was referring to before when I was saying that based on the risk, all this is changing in real time. So it's more simple for someone who's low risk than someone who's high risk. Why? Because the documents might have changed. The element of outreach goes into different levels. So outreach is used for onboarding of new applicants who are applying for new services. Outreach is used for reviews, so when the review is due and we need to send the application to the client for them to confirm that the details are correct or update new details. Outreach sometimes is triggered by the client, where the customer tells us, listen guys, I have a new structure that I want to add to the hierarchy, to the organogram. Outreach is also used for remediation, when we have remediation exercises that need to happen eventually. Outreach can also happen when I have one-off requests. So for example, the organization has a subject who's become high risk and I suddenly need to do a face-to-face video call with the subject. So outreach is something that exists throughout the entire experience of a client, and having that embedded in a CLM leads to a lot of efficiencies. So the first and most important one is the ability to define the entire onboarding. So having the outreach embedded in a system which is dynamic with real-time values allows you to design the entire experience, design the fields, the order, the validation, questionnaires. Questionnaires are the famous source of wealth, PEP, declaration forms, company profile forms. The system allows you to define all that and define them by type of entity, when they should be asked, at what stage of the entire experience. However, when you have outreach modules like these, they become tools that can be used not only for onboarding, but for the entire process itself. So reviews, remediation, and also applying for new services. In fact, the more we move forward within the industry of KYC and due diligence, the more we see that the communication between organization and the subject becomes more ongoing. And this is, in fact, a term that is being coined as perpetual KYC. We're moving more and more towards an environment that is leading to a continuous relationship with our customers. That is all the features that we wanted to focus on from a client use case that actually led to the efficiencies we saw, the 62%, 63% of efficiencies, and also the 5 to 55% of improving customer onboarding with, across the board, reducing the time to reducing the risk of the overall function. However, as you can imagine, not all of it is as simple as it sounds. In fact, CLMs like these, systems like these, which are maybe more advanced than the systems that banks, organizations have in place, tend to raise a number of hurdles, challenges that we face on a constant basis. And over here, we wanted to list some of them, some of the most common ones. So we do have clients who, for example, have existing onboarding solutions in place where they say, listen, I do not need a system because I already have a means to onboard my customers, invested quite a lot in creating our own unique bespoke onboarding solution. We do have many customers. One of the biggest issues on the market is having core legacy systems, having systems in place, core banking systems, CRMs, ERPs, custom solutions that are being used to manage all this data, which make clients believe it's impossible for us to ever achieve a state, for example, of a single customer view. My systems do not allow for that even to happen. We do have customers, and we see customers where they tell us, I already have an existing system for calculating risk in place at the moment. It's proprietary. We spent a lot of money to be able to this, and we have it already in place. Proprietary authentication systems. We have clients that tell us, listen, for us to have an outreach element, they have to be connected to our internet banking. And these are all examples of challenges that we solved. So for example, from this element of proprietary authentication systems, the customer outreach tool, for example, was hooked up for one particular bank with their internet banking. So the institutional clients from internet banking can click a button and go directly to the outreach module. The existing risk systems, important to understand that the risk systems that you have in place do, yes, cater for risk that you want to perceive. However, adding that as a risk element to a lifecycle management platform helps, because it allows and gives you more flexibility to add more elements of risk. We have clients, for example, who not only use our system for regulatory risk, for AML risk, but use it for ESG risk, for supplier onboarding risk, for different elements, brand reputation risk. The core legacy systems, and yes, this is an issue that is overcome in most difficult ways via integrations, via APIs. Existing onboarding solutions, going back to it quickly, is we have clients who kept their onboarding solutions and hooked up with CLMs that they are adopting to add to the whole concept of the system being dynamic and being as flexible as possible. And obviously, the numerous systems that one would have in place, numerous systems like CRMs, ERPs, that a CLM would need to communicate with. I think the most important element for one to understand is that a CLM, a system like this, is not there to replace any system. Usually, it is very rare that it replaces systems, but to act as an orchestration layer with everything else. So yes, the ability to give you the efficiencies you want to achieve, the efficiencies in reducing the cost of intended processes, onboarding faster, and also reducing the risk exposure. However, not by replacing current systems, but by hooking up with your current systems and allowing the data to flow, push, pull information across the board to be able to achieve and deliver that level of benefit. That is everything from our end. Many thanks for your time. My name is Kristoff. Feel free to get in touch on the email address you're seeing on screen.